Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Toddler Talks webinar brought to you by Aptamil Toddler Milks. So my name is Michelle Redmond and I'm delighted to be your chairperson for this evening's webinar. I'm one of the nutritionists on the Aptamil team, but I'm also personally really looking forward to our talks this evening from Sarah Keogh and Joanna, as I'm sure, like many of you, I first became a mum in the midst of the pandemic, and I'm currently a busy mum to a toddler aged 17 months. So as a nutritionist, I know that establishing good nutritional habits early in life will provide an excellent foundation for the future health of our children. And that it's this period from 1 to 5 years, it's a really exciting, but also a challenging time of tremendous growth across all areas of development. So both physical and cognitive development. So just to share a few wow factors about our toddlers with you. So physically, toddlers are growing at a faster rate in the first 3 years of life than any other stage. Then in terms of their cognitive development, 80% of their adult brain mass is already achieved by 3 years, and we've got approximately 900 words learned by age 3. So it's really no surprise to us that they may have the odd tantrum or two. With all of this in mind, it's also no surprise to us that toddlers have significantly higher nutritional requirements than adults relative to their size. So this really highlights the importance of the quality over the quantity of foods that are in their diet. And then as a parent, finally, I'm also aware that our toddlers go through stages of fussy eating, food refusal, food throwing, etc. So I'm personally really looking forward to hearing more about how we navigate parenting busy and strong-willed toddlers while ensuring we also achieve adequate nutrition in their diets. I'm now delighted to introduce you to our first speaker of the evening, Sarah Keogh. Sarah is a Curry registered dietitian based in Dublin. Sarah runs her own feeding clinic, helping parents to navigate all of the nutrition information around feeding a baby, as well as preventing and managing fussy eating. Sarah is going to tell us how to get the best nutrition for our toddlers. And can I kindly ask you to post any questions you have for Sarah in the chat box, and we will answer them as part of the live Q&A session after the talks.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sarah Keogh. I'm a dietitian, and I'm going to talk to you today about getting the best toddler nutrition. And what we are going to look at today is just a couple of the key nutrients that we do find quite a few toddlers are missing out on. And then I'll look at just general advice about diet and nutrition, and we'll have a chat a little bit about portion sizes, because I know that's an issue a lot of parents have difficulty with. So when we look at toddler nutrition in Ireland, we have a couple of studies, but one of the big ones was a study that looked at sort of preschool nutrition, and they found a few things with that. They found that 97% of sort of toddlers in Ireland weren't hitting targets for vitamin D. We know that about 23% of 1-year-olds weren't getting what they needed for vitamin or for iron, 30% not hitting targets for fibre, about 93% not hitting targets for things like omega-3, and then issues around maybe overweight and even obesity with some very young children as well. So we'll start off with vitamin D. And, the big question is, why are so many children in Ireland missing out from vitamin D? Well, the big problem is that we are supposed to be getting vitamin D from the sun. But let's face it, we're not exactly famous for our sunny weather in Ireland, so we do miss out. So from October through to March, the sun that hits Ireland is too weak for us to make any vitamin D. So even if it is a nice sunny day in the middle of winter and you go for a walk, you're still not going to make any vitamin D from that. And then during the summer, although the sun is stronger, we tend to have so much rain and cloud cover that we still don't make enough vitamin D. And of course, we've good recommendations about sunscreen for young children as well, which we should be following. But all of these things combine to mean that sometimes vitamin D isn't at the levels that we'd like it to be. There's also not a huge amount of vitamin D in foods. And so we do recommend that particularly young children would take a supplement or at least a fortified food in the winter. So why do we need vitamin D? So vitamin D is really important for healthy bones. So we need vitamin D to absorb and use the calcium that children eat, so for adults and for children. So it's really with normal growth, we want to get nice kind of dense bones, we want to get good calcium in there. But we also know that vitamin D helps to support the immune system. So we know that, if we look at vitamin D levels, if we're talking about levels of sort of 5 micrograms a day, only up to, between 70 and 85% of toddlers are hitting that. Some people would talk about getting up to 10 micrograms a day. And when you're looking at that level, you're probably only seeing about 97 or about 3% of toddlers actually hitting those targets, which is not what we want. So where do we get it? So if you look at oily fish would be one place to pick it up. So salmon would be one, but 100 grams of salmon, which is quite, sort of an adult portion, is giving you about 7 micrograms of vitamin D. And, you might talk about having oily fish every day, but it's not recommended to do that either. So it's a little bit difficult, even if someone is eating fish, particularly for young children, to get the amounts they need. Eggs will give a little bit of vitamin D, you'll get a little bit in tuna. But we know from research that only about 15% of Irish toddlers are actually getting oil-rich fish. A lot of them just don't eat it at all. So we're really just looking at vitamin D levels being quite low. So as I said, oily fish like salmon and tuna will have a little bit of vitamin D, but in reality, kids would have to be eating them every single day. And the Food Safety Authority in Ireland recommends that children have oily fish just once a week. So although you will pick up a little bit of vitamin D from that, it's not going to be enough. And again, eggs will have a little, but again, it's very difficult for toddlers and even for adults to get all the vitamin D they need just from eggs. So what do we do? Well, the HSE has a recommendation out now that all children aged between 1 and 4 need a vitamin D supplement in the winter. So they would talk about Halloween through to St. Patrick's Day, and that liquid drops of vitamin D only supplement are the best ones to go for. And they want that you kids are getting about 5 micrograms of vitamin D every day during the winter. And that's been a recommendation that's quite a recent one in Ireland for children aged 1 to 4. A lot of you will be familiar with recommendations for babies up to 1 year getting vitamin D, but they've now extended this as well. You'll also see more foods these days fortified with vitamin D. So you'll see vitamin D added into things like breakfast cereals. There's fortified cow's milk out there. There's toddler milks that are fortified with vitamin D. So it might be something your kids are already getting. So just check labels and see if vitamin D is added, because that can be another option. So the next one to have a look at is iron. And again, we do see some toddlers and young children struggling with iron. So we know about 23% of 1-year-olds aren't hitting targets for iron, about 10% of 2 to 3-year-olds. The reason it's lower in 2 to 3-year-olds is they're just eating bigger portions, so it's a little easier for them to get it in. But we need iron to just build healthy red blood cells, and those red blood cells help to carry oxygen around your body. So that's all about, good energy levels. We know that iron is needed for good brain development, and we know that it's part of a healthy immune system as well. So why do lots of children miss out on iron? So it can be lots of things. They might not like iron-rich foods. They might be a fussy eater and just don't eat them. They might only eat small portions, and especially we see issues in children who are quite small. The way you'll have kids, you'll have some kids at 3 are quite big, some are quite small, and we do see the smaller children might be struggling to get enough iron. Maybe iron-rich foods just don't turn up, but they're not served all that often. The big thing I see with a lot of parents when we're talking to kids about iron, though, is that there's actually less iron in food than people expect. So people genuinely think they're giving their kids lots of iron, but sometimes they're just not giving them the foods that would be a good source of it. The one I see a lot is everyone talking about broccoli and iron, and there's actually very little iron in broccoli. It's a tiny bit, but I do see parents and they think if their kid has eaten 1 spear of broccoli a day that they're covered, and it's just not going to be enough. So what are the iron-rich foods? So we talk a lot about red meat being a really good source of iron, and it is. It's an excellent source of iron, and the body finds it very easy to absorb iron from this. Now, I know people can get concerned about red meat, and we hear lots of different things about, does it cause cancer, and is it linked to all these different diseases? Lean red meat is actually a great food for kids, and we do recommend, the Food Safety Authority of Ireland recommends about 30 grams of red meat 3 times a week for young children, kind of aged 1 to 5, really in terms of just getting the iron up. The thing with red meat to watch out for, and this is the one we often hear about when we talk about bowel cancer later on, is processed red meat is the big problem. So things like ham and bacon and sausages that have a lot of salt and a lot of processing, we don't want kids having a whole lot of those. So really just to limit those down. And when you're thinking about red meat, think about stew, think about spaghetti bolognese, shepherd's pie, homemade burgers. They're all brilliant places to get some of the red meat in that kids will eat, and it's just a lovely place to get the iron. When it comes to poultry, you really get most of the iron in the legs. So if you're thinking about chicken and turkey, it's the thighs and the legs and the drumsticks that actually have the iron. Chicken breast will give you a little, but it's not a huge amount really in there. I would, if you were just kind of having chicken breast all the time, I'd be making sure there was something else in the meal that had iron in it. And I'll talk about some alternatives there in a second. You will get a little bit of iron in oily fish, so back to your salmon, mackerel, things like that. And shellfish, if your kids will eat them, actually are a good source of iron, especially mussels. Mussels have more iron in them than beef, so they can actually be a brilliant source. Some kids love them, some kids hate them, but if your kids will eat them, they are brilliant. On sort of what we call the non-heme, which is a slightly different type of iron, we have the green leafy vegetables, but it's not all green veg. And this is where I see lots of parents kind of getting confused. So there's 3 green veg that actually have a decent amount of iron, and that is spinach, cabbage, and kale. And I know kale technically is cabbage as well, but they're the 3 that actually have sort of a decent amount of iron in them. So other green vegetables will have a tiny bit, so it all kind of adds up and it all helps. But I wouldn't be counting a whole lot of other green vegetables just as the sole source of iron in the day for a lot of kids. So look as well for things like beans, barley, lentils. They're all actually quite good sources of iron as well. So things like chickpeas and kidney beans, lentils, so red, green or brown lentils into a soup, into a casserole, into a stew. You can actually throw a handful even into, if you were doing a chicken casserole. So we're saying maybe the chicken breast doesn't have a huge amount of iron, but if you put a couple of handfuls of barley, lentils, things like that into it, you've added iron by popping those in. So they're going to be really good. You can also put them into soups and puree them. So if you have a child who doesn't like to eat a whole lot of vegetables, they like things nice and smooth, lentils are brilliant, and chickpeas actually are really good because they'll blend down very smooth. So kids, you can sneak them in. Crushed seeds and nuts, so they're often good sources of iron. So things like pumpkin seeds, almonds, hazelnuts, all of those actually have a bit of iron in them. Now, the younger children, obviously, we're talking about choking in nuts, and that's why we talk about crushed nuts and seeds. But some of the nut butters, like almond butter and things like that, will also have some iron in them. So they can be options for children as well. Sometimes you can add things like crushed seeds into maybe your breakfast cereal. If you make bread, they're things that you can add in as well. And as I said, the nut butters on toast or crackers, things like that, as part of lunch would be another way of topping up the iron. Fortified foods are going to be important as well. If we look at breakfast cereals, a lot of breakfast cereals are fortified with iron, and they actually make up, would you believe, they're the major source of iron in the diets of kids in Ireland. So they're actually quite helpful. Now, I know when I talk about fortified breakfast cereals, people have visions of sort of chocolate coated, sugar coated. They don't have to be. A lot of the high fiber breakfast cereals are actually fortified with iron as well, and they can be really quite low in sugar. So they're actually fine for kids to have as well. And then eggs would be another good place to pick up iron for children as well. Now, we do know that eating vitamin C with what we call the non-heme iron foods boosts the iron absorption. So if you are having something like cabbage or spinach or barley or lentils, if kids can have some vegetables or salad with them, or a small glass of diluted fruit juice as well, that extra little bit of vitamin C can really help to boost the iron absorption for them. So what about supplements? So we know that 1 to 3-year-olds need about 7 milligrams of iron every day. And what we do know is that a lot of kids are getting it, but smaller toddlers and children can have difficulty because if you're a very small child, just portion, your tummy is smaller, so to be able to eat the portions of food can be a little more difficult. So we do see some experts recommending that there is an iron supplement for children who are really just quite small for their age. Now, they can still be healthy, but it's just, some people are big and some people are small. So you can actually pick it up in iron fortified toddler milks, can be one place to get it, or you can supplement with 7 milligrams of iron 4 days a week. So not every single day, so maybe about 4 days a week to think about with that. But having a look as well is just making sure there's plenty of iron-rich foods coming into the diet all the time, so kids are in a good habit of getting those foods in and that they're used to them, so that their iron does stay nice and healthy. The next nutrient to take a look at are the omega-3s, and these are particularly important. We know that during pregnancy, omega-3s are really important for brain development and eye development, and we know just for all of that growth and development, they're going to be important. So recommendations, there's vary a little bit, so somewhere between 100 to 250 milligrams of omega-3s, particularly these two, this EPA and DHA per day. We know the average intake in toddlers in Ireland is around 70. So around 72% of toddlers are not meeting targets for omega-3s. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the issues is that only 15% of toddlers are eating oil-rich fish. So, if 85% of toddlers are not eating oil-rich fish, they can be really struggling to get these omega-3s in as well. So we do recommend that everybody, including toddlers, that they have fish twice a week and to include one oily fish. Now, the oily fish, what we really tend to think about with these would be things like the salmon, trout, mackerel, herring, and sardines. When it comes to the whitefish do actually have a little bit of omega-3, and sea bass of all things actually has quite a good amount. But we'd love just to see kids getting some of the oily fish in even once a week just to top up the omega-3s with it. Now, the thing with the fish is that it doesn't matter what you do with them. So whether they are fresh or frozen or tinned or whatever it is, it will keep the omega-3. So tinned salmon will have plenty of omega-3 as much as fresh. And the same with things like tinned sardines and mackerel. And again, it's sometimes just getting kids used to eating them. What we tend to see is lots of kids eat them until they're about 1 year old because, you know, with weaning, a lot of people are making up baby food and there's lots of fish dishes and things. And then around 1 year, the baby tends to join the family meals. And unless the family is also eating fish, that fish can drop. So you have a lot of kids who actually have a taste for it up to 1 year and then they lose it. So lovely if you can kind of keep that going. Now, I'm going to just mention nuts and seeds here because, you know, if you do Google up anything on omega-3s, these always pop up. So you will get omega-3s in nuts and in seeds, but it's a different type of omega-3 than the type that you get in fish. So I mentioned earlier that we talk about EPA and DHA as the omega-3s, but really after sort of brain development and nerve development. With ALA, it's different and it doesn't seem to have quite the same effect with it. So it's really important that you do think about getting the fish in for the kids. So what about fruit and vegetables? So just in general, we wanted to include a portion of vegetables with certainly the main meal every day. One of the things that we do need to be careful about with fruit and vegetables is that we want to make sure kids aren't so full up on fruit and vegetables that they're not eating, particularly their iron-rich foods. So we kind of want them eating sort of their meat or their beans or their lentils with that. We don't want them completely full up on sort of salads and things like that, but they do still need them because they need the vitamin D and they definitely need the fiber. So what you're actually looking at is getting a portion of vegetables with the main meal. So, you know, maybe around a third of the plate is quite good. Even a quarter to a third of the plate is lovely for that. And then you're going to add in some sort of snacks through the day or add them in at other meals through the day. And it's very easy to follow. You're looking at one small piece of fruit or vegetable or salad for a 1 year old, 2 for 2 year olds, 3 for 3 year olds. You can see where this is going. And it's just about bringing it in through the day. What we do want to be careful about is that they're not snacking all day long on fruit. For two reasons. One, it's not really good for teeth. Fruit's a little bit acidic, and if you just have it, you know, two, 3 times a day, particularly with meals, it's not really affecting teeth. But if you see kids who are nibbling all day long on fruit, they're just constantly putting that little bit of acid onto their teeth, so it's not a good thing to do all the time. But it's nice just to bring it into different foods that they're eating, and it can be fresh fruit, but you can also look at some of the fruit-based desserts, like if you were to do stewed fruit with a, you know, tiny bit of added sugar. And again, if kids aren't used to it, they won't notice if it's not there. It'll taste weird to us, but kids don't tend to notice. So bringing in just fruit in those ways as well can actually be brilliant. So just about bringing it in, because we do talk about sort of the 5 a day. And sometimes I see parents and they're trying to get this adult 5 a day into a 3-year-old, and they're just going to be full. So if you think of just that smaller amount, but just a little bit often through the day, we do still want them to get it because we want them gaining the taste of it and the flavors of it, and particularly staying used to the texture of it, because we don't want kids on purees all the time. But just take your time with small serving sizes with that and just build it on up nice and slow. So what about milk and calcium? So let's face it, kids are growing really quickly at this age, and a big part of that is going to be their bones getting longer, but also getting denser. So we want really strong bones. We don't just want them nice and long, we want them very, very strong with that. And this is where your milk and your dairy foods are going to come in as a really important food for this age group. So your 1 to sort of 5-year-olds. And they do need 3 servings of dairy a day, which is actually the same as for adults. So it's a good amount that they need to get. So 1 serving would be 200 mils of milk. So that could be 2 small glasses of milk over the day. It could be maybe some milk over breakfast cereal. Good places to bring that in. Yogurt, so about 150 mils, so kind of like a big enough pot of yogurt, or about 2 to 3 dessert spoons of yogurt for them to have with that. I often find toddlers absolutely love yogurt, so that this one usually works. And it is okay if it's a fruit yogurt. Like plain yogurt is good and a fruit yogurt is good. But when we think about things like sugar and so on, what we don't want to be going for is the ones that are full of kind of, you know, chocolate sauce and toffee sauce and crunchy bits and all of those kind of things. Try and keep it sort of the plainer end, because we don't want them to be overfull on things like sugar. Cheese is going to be brilliant as well. Hard cheese is a really good source of calcium, so things like cheddar cheese. So this is a good thing to pop up, you know, in fingers. Apple, you know, slices of apple and cheese are a lovely snack for kids. But just ways of bringing that in. It can be grated over meals as well, nice with pasta and so on. But just make sure they're getting that 3 servings in a day so that they're getting enough calcium for the bones. Dairy is also going to be another place for protein for kids. So we talk about beans and lentils and fish and meat and eggs and things like that for protein, but they actually top up their protein as well with their milk, with their cheese and with their yogurt. So they're going to be important for that as well as for the calcium. You can switch to low-fat milk from the age of 2, definitely better off on the full-fat milk, certainly until the age of 2, but you don't have to. It's absolutely fine if you want to stay on the full-fat milk. The calcium is the same between the two. Sometimes people are worried that there's less calcium in the low-fat milk and so on, but actually it's almost identical. In fact, there's probably slightly more calcium in low-fat milk, but it's tiny. So there's no problem what you want to do with that, but definitely don't go on to the low-fat before the age of 2 because the kids actually just need the calories. Be careful not to give too much milk. A common problem is where you see maybe a 2 or 3-year-old who are still having 5 or 6 glasses of milk a day, or even 5 or 6 still in the bottles every day. If they're very full on milk, they tend not to have appetite then for other foods. And that's where we would see the fussy eaters getting been low in some of the B vitamins maybe, or been low in iron and stuff like that. So it's one to watch. We see it an awful lot. And I think what sometimes happens is you might have a fussy eater and maybe they don't eat a meal and you think, well, I'll give them some milk because at least they're getting something. And it becomes a bit of a vicious circle where the child is having so much milk that they just don't have the appetite to actually eat the meals. And it's a common cause of fussy eating with that one. So remember, sort of 3 a day with the dairy. And if it's all milk, if they're having 3 glasses of milk and then they're also having yogurt and cheese, actually you might need to nudge that back a little bit so that they have the appetite for some of the other foods that we want them to eat. What about plant milk alternatives? So maybe if you have a child who has a cow's milk protein allergy, or you want to raise your child on a fully plant-based diet, what are we going to do instead? So what really is important here is that if you're using a plant-based milk alternative, especially for a young child, they must be fortified. So plant-based milks naturally don't have a huge amount of calcium. So you need to read the label, you need to make sure it has calcium added to it, and it's useful to see has it other nutrients like vitamin D, maybe even B12 added as well. So the one that we would generally talk about as an alternative to cow's milk is soya milk, calcium fortified soya milk. And the reason we would talk about the soya milk is that it's higher in protein than a lot of the other milk alternatives. So if you're going to take cow's milk out, you're going to be losing the calcium and the protein. So with the calcium fortified soya milk, you're starting to put those back in again. So that we just keep the nutrition really just nice and balanced. It's important to remember, though, that almond, coconut, oat and rice milk are very specifically not recommended for children because they're just nutritionally inadequate. They're not going to give the child the nutrition they need. And I know lots of people get confused about this because you kind of hear milk and you assume they're just different versions of milk, but actually they're very different. And very often, as I said, the plant milk alternatives do need to have calcium and other nutrients added. So just again, check your labels, make sure that it's calcium fortified. And again, if you were thinking about sort of 3 servings from dairy, you do need 3 servings of the calcium fortified soya milk. Now, again, that can be the milk itself in terms of them having a glass of milk or milk over cereal, or some of the calcium fortified soy-based yogurts can be quite useful as well as an alternative, but it does still need to be the 3 a day. So make sure that's happening too. So they're kind of the main nutrients that we want to have a think about, but I also want to talk a little bit about habits and portions, because I find, again, as I mentioned earlier, parents can get really confused about how much am I actually supposed to give my child. And it causes more rows when if you give kids portion sizes that are too big and then they don't eat them, or you don't give them enough and they're going around looking for snacks later. So how do we balance it out? So one of the things about large portion sizes is it quite often puts children off eating. Now, every child is different, and you'll often be working in a family and one child will be eating brilliantly and the other is struggling. There's not always any rhyme or reason to it. But for a lot of children, if you put a big plate of food down in front of them, they actually just feel overwhelmed before they've even started, and it can actually put them off eating quite a bit of their meals as well. On the other hand, some kids will just sit down and eat it. It's there, they eat it, they clear the plate, and of course then that can lead to weight gain for a child. So we want children growing normally, putting on the right amount of weight. What we don't want is them to sort of overshoot a little bit, and if we're giving them very large portions, and especially if there's someone who clears their plate all the time, we need to just keep an eye on the amounts we're giving them. Can definitely put the fussy eaters off. It's a bit of a waste of food as well sometimes, whether, if they don't eat it, you're throwing it out, and if they do eat it, it's kind of over what they need. So how do we get it right? And I'm showing you just some of the different portion sizes that are out there in terms of what we might need. So one of the things for yourselves as parents is to think about your own portion sizes, and particularly for things like treat foods. But as you can see here, this is sort of a standard chocolate chip cookie, which is about 8 grams. and about 38 calories. And then we have the giant chocolate chip cookie, which is getting up to 341, which is, it's coming up to about 10 times the calories. But what we sometimes do with kids is we give them one biscuit, but if it's this giant one, like the kids are delighted to have this giant cookie, but it's a huge amount of food for a small child. It's even a huge amount of food for a grown-up. So just looking at portion sizes with it. And even again, looking at things like crisps, and I'm not recommending, I said this isn't talking about this for adults, but you've got sort of a standard bag of crisps that's about 32 grams. And then if you get sort of the sharing bags, you're up to maybe 800 calories with that. I'd often joke, and I'm talking to adults as well, is, don't buy a sharing bag of crisps and then you're actually going to share it, because just the amount is there and it's very easy just to keep going. And it's where sometimes we demonize certain foods, we don't want to eat certain things, but actually portion sizes are going to be really relevant across the board. So what do kids actually need? So when we talk about eating, they do need 3 meals a day. So it's good for children to be getting breakfast, lunch and dinner. And then they need maybe 2 to 3 small snacks a day. No more than that. And any food eaten in between meals is a snack, even if it's just one little thing that they eat. You've got to just watch that, because I do see lots of kids who are this grazing going on all day long. And what's useful to do is to actually set some times for meals and snacks. That can be really, really helpful. Not that it has to be a rigid set time, but if you have an idea, well, breakfast is around 8 o'clock, lunch is 1 o'clock, dinner is 6 o'clock. Well, then you can time the snacks in, because you can go, well, look, if lunch is 1 o'clock, we don't want to give them a snack close to lunch, because otherwise they won't eat their lunch. So, a really good guide is to not give snacks within about 2 hours of actually eating a meal. So if lunch is at 1 o'clock, the last snack should be sort of finishing at 11. So you might be giving it to them at 11:15, so that then they have 2 hours to get hungry again. And so when they sit down to their lunch, they're ready, rather than you preparing a meal and the child is like, I'm not hungry. So timings can be good. And they're also good then if you have other people looking after your child as well, because sometimes, if you have family members minding them, or somebody else is looking after them today, or things like that, you can kind of go, look, lunch is this time, snack is this time. Try not to kind of give them lots of snacks through the days with it. It's a good idea to use child-sized plates and cups and bowls with that. So if you have a look at some of the sizes that I have here, a child, a side plate, around 20 centimeters, it's a good chunk smaller than the adult dinner plate. And again, when I've been in clinic over the years, people coming in saying, the kid, they're a great eater, they eat the same dinner I do. And you're thinking it's an awful lot of food for an 8-year-old if they're having a sort of an adult-sized dinner, unless they're doing, like, seriously, they're one of these incredibly talented kids who's going to be in the Olympics and they're training 5 hours a day. They don't need it. So just keep an eye on it. And the same with kind of bowls. It's worth getting some smaller bowls. The child-sized ones are just smaller, other ones that you'll use. But even if we look at drinks around that, like the adult, about a 200 mils of milk is fine for a drink, but for children it's too much. So just to keep it down. So don't overfill plates as well. So we mentioned just not piling food up. You're better off to give a little bit and let them eat it. And then if they're actually looking for a bit more, you can give them a bit more rather than giving them huge amounts of foods. And we talk about getting foods from all of the food groups every day. So it's good for them to be offered, some of your kind of carbohydrates, your whole grain bread, things like that, whole grain cereals. It's good for them to get some fruit and veg, to get their dairy, their milk in, to get their meat and so on in. And they'll pick up a little bit of fat from maybe olive oil and, spreads that they have through the day. One of the things I would say about children is sometimes parents are worried that, they haven't eaten perfectly today. And actually sometimes if you're not sure how your child is doing, it's worth writing down what they eat over maybe about 10 days. Because you will have days where kids will eat a lot of fruit and maybe not a whole lot of dairy. And then the next day they might actually, have a good bit of yogurt and maybe less fruit and things like that. So sometimes it's look over the 10 days and sort of really take an average. So I know, like in clinic, that's how we would do it. We wouldn't just look at 1 day or 2 days. You'd actually try and get a sweep over kind of maybe about 10 days, because it's a lot easier just to see kids up and down with that. So I just wanted to show you some of the portion sizes that we would look at. So you're talking for kids, for protein foods, about 30 grams, which is about a third of a standard chicken breast. Now, the adult portion here, this is sort of the official guidelines on it, is 50 to 75 grams of cooked chicken. Most adults eat 100 to 120 grams of cooked chicken. So it is usually more than is recommended. So, but just to look at the size, and as I mentioned, even for kids, you're talking about 2 small glasses of milk. The temptation is always to fill up the glass. So that's why actually having a smaller cup or a smaller glass is good. And this is one to watch because, again, if I'm working with fussy eaters, parents will say, well, you know, I put the dinner down and they don't eat any of it. But what's happened is before they've done anything else, they've filled up a glass with milk. The child has picked it up, they've drunk this whole glass of milk, and then dinner comes along and they're actually full. So I actually wouldn't give a drink to children sitting down to the table until they'd finished eating, and then offer them something to drink, because it actually does trigger a lot of fussy eating. Half a banana. We hear a lot about bananas being good or bad for us. Bananas actually are brilliant, but for adults, no problem, eat a whole banana, enjoy it. But for, you know, small kids, half a banana is plenty. You know, half a pita pocket. Just looking at laying out plates. And resist, and I often think it's a very Irish thing, is to fill a plate. We don't like to see all this white space on the plate, but actually it's fine, as long as we're just keeping portions nice and balanced and correct for the kids. What about treat foods, or what we sometimes call sometimes foods, which I think is a lovely way of putting it. The bad news is small children do not need these foods. And I go, unfortunately, adults don't need them either. It's no harm the odd one. And I know when recommendations came out a while ago where they were talking about really just one treat a week, there was we heard a lot of coverage in the media over it, and people like, what, one treat a week? And you're thinking, well, for a 1-year-old, they don't know any different. They don't know any different. They won't know what other treats anyone is getting. And the reason that we talked about restricting them so much is that children fill up on these. It's very, very easy to eat a lot of sort of calories from these foods, which means kids can sit down and eat, you know, the sweets, the crisps, the biscuits and things like that. And there's so little. We often forget that a child's tummy isn't much bigger than their fist. So, you know, a cookie for you and me, you know, we could eat it and, you know, we'd still be well able for our dinner. But for a 1-year-old, if they eat that whole biscuit, they're not going to eat their lunch, which means it pushes out their nutritious foods. So one of two things happen. What you find is kids are too full after eating these foods, then they don't eat their main meal. Then they miss their iron, they miss their vitamin D, you know, they miss their fiber, and it's gone. Or they eat those foods plus their dinner, and then we look at children just maybe having more calories than they need, and it's just not healthy in terms of their growth. So the guidelines are, and I know when I say these to parents, people are often kind of shocked with this, but if you're looking at 1 to 4-year-olds, you're talking 1 square of chocolate, you know. Really keep it small. 3 crisps, and I know when this came out as guidelines last year, there was just people giving out about it all over the place. But again, children are very small. They're tiny compared to you and me. So it's really just to get the portion sizes down. And as well as that, it's the amount of salt that's in there as well. Half a plain biscuit and 3 soft sweets. Now, as an adult, it sounds tiny, but children, I keep saying this, they don't know any different. And to be honest, if you can delay giving them sort of sweets and treats for as long as possible, it's no harm, because we want them, they really need to be eating the good, nutritious, healthy food more than anything else. Things like chicken nuggets, chips, pizza, things like that, really just once a week. And I would say to just no fizzy drinks. It's just, again, a lot of sugar in there, and it's not good for the teeth and overall. I know it sounds very, very strict, but you'll find children eat a lot better. And again, when I'm working with fussy eaters, one of the issues is often that, you know, they're being given treats, not necessarily by parents. I often find sometimes the grandparents are a bigger culprit with it. But it's just someone is just giving them sort of a gentle, a small treat, and it just suddenly, as the child is full, and it can be difficult to get them to eat the nice healthy food that we want them to be eating. So really, sometimes foods once a week, very, very limited. And to be honest, if you can get by without giving them any at all for a few years, no harm with that. So how do we help children just to eat well? So one of the things to look at is that you actually eat with your children as much as you can, because I'm conscious I've spoken about lovely nutrition here, and you know what a lot of parents then say to me, well, I have a fussy eater, how do I get them to eat it? You know, this all sounds great, but if they don't like fruit and they don't like milk and they don't like, what do you do? So one of the things that we do know is that if you can actually sit down and eat with your child, it actually makes it a lot easier for them. We know that where that happens, and the more often that happens, children tend to be much better in terms of all that they eat and the variety of foods. What we tend to do, and I see it a lot, is we tend to pop a child up into a high chair and give them their meal, and we're kind of in and around the kitchen, and the child is sort of eating just on their own. Whereas if we can sit with them, if they can watch you eat, watch what you eat, it shows them different things, and it gets them curious about your food and curious about what else is going on. And also kids want to grow up, and they want to sort of act a little bit like, you know, like grown-ups. So sometimes copying what, you know, adults around them are doing can be really helpful. So they will often eat something off your plate that they wouldn't have eaten if you gave it to them. I often think of one of my own kids, just couldn't get him to eat pasta for a long, long time. And then one day he was sitting on my lap when he was about a year and a half. I'm eating my dinner and he just started pulling the pasta off my plate. and he started eating it. But up to that, if I put it in front of him, he had nothing to do with it. So, you know, it's funny what can just trigger a child's curiosity and get them eating a little bit more. And it's lovely if you can kind of get them eating even with other family members. And I find COVID has been a disaster in terms of just that social side of eating for a lot of kids. But where and when you can, try and get that in, that they're seeing what other people are doing, and it helps them actually just to copy that. And, you know, they'll often even, little kids, they'll often wander around the table and pick at whatever else is there. It's good if you can let them eat with other children. Again, we've had restrictions on this recently, but what you'll often find is your child might eat something in someone else's house that they wouldn't have eaten in your house. And it's a good way, again, of getting kids to eat more variety in foods. Things are cooked in different ways in other people's houses and vice versa. You know, so it can be good for them to learn different things. I often think back that when I was younger, I wouldn't eat eggs at all. And I was staying over in one of my friend's houses one day, and her mum was doing fried eggs for dinner. And, you know this, you have to eat what's put in front of you. So I did. And I actually thought, God, these eggs actually aren't that bad. But I would have refused them at home. So, you know, just overcoming different things. So seeing what other children are eating. And again, that's why you'll sometimes see children eating much better, for example, in creche than they would at home. And it's because they're eating around other children as well. A lovely thing, if you have time, is to get kids cooking. This is one of the loveliest ways to get children interested in food, but it also actually gets them overcoming any difficulties with food. So sometimes with a fussy eater, you might have someone who doesn't like the feel of a food or the smell of the food, or even it looks a bit odd to them. And if you sort of put it on their plate, they're just, I'm not going to eat it. Whereas if they cook, they might be handling it, but not eating it. So if they're chopping up a cucumber or something like that, they're going to be throwing it into a bowl. But the thing about it is, with kids, it's going to get on their hands. They're going to get the smell of it. They might end up licking their fingers. So there's a little bit of tastes coming in all the time. So actually, when we can, if I'm working with fussy eaters, if we can get them doing a little bit of cooking, you know, younger kids can tear up lettuce. They can mix things with their hands in a bowl and stuff like that. You know, just getting them hands-on with the cooking, it breaks down some of the barriers to food with it and can really, really help with that. The other thing is that it's lovely to teach them some cooking skills. You know, every year when, you know, college time comes out, I always end up getting asked to do articles about cooking for people who've never cooked before. So I think it's a lovely thing if we can teach kids even how to boil an egg and some basic stuff to get them started. Going shopping with kids as well. Now, I know taking kids to the supermarket, I have kids myself, and it's a lovely thing to go on your own and not have a child screaming in the trolley with you. But when they're a little bigger, if you can bring them into the supermarket, what's nice is to get them to pick up the food. And again, if you have a fussy eater, you're teaching kids about food. If you can say, well, will you go and get the broccoli, or will you go and get the carrots, that they're touching them and bringing them in. And it does make it a little bit easier to actually get it onto their plate for them later on. Cookery shows can be great. And not just baking. We tend to be really good at doing the cakes and the biscuits and things with children. It's lovely to do some of the savoury food with them as well and get them involved in that. And some of the cooking shows, I've seen this work quite well, because sometimes the children see something that just looks great and think, well, I'd like to try that. And again, then they're cooking a little bit more. Another good trick with children is to grow things like herbs. And these days you can actually buy them in plant pots in supermarkets. A lot of the garden centres have them. Stick them on the windowsill. You can kill them, but it takes a bit of effort. I'm quite good at killing plants. It's a running joke in my house. But, you know, if you have things like parsley or mint or things like that on the windowsill that you can put into anything, kids are often fascinated by having grown that. You can grow them from seeds, which is quite fascinating for kids, and they're not difficult to do. Peas actually grow really well. I have done them on windowsills. And again, kids who would never eat a pea if you put it on their plate are fascinated with popping them off with the pods and doing them like that. Peas are really, really easy to grow. If you are finding that you're having big problems, so if you have a really severe fussy eater, if you're finding that there's whole food groups your child is missing, or you're just generally concerned, have a look for a KORU registered dietitian. Really important, if you're getting advice about nutrition for children, make sure the person giving you advice is qualified. There's a lot of kind of confusion out there about nutrition sometimes. So KORU registered dietitians it's a little bit like doctors have to register with the medical council. Dietitians have to register with another state government body called KORU and have their qualifications checked before they can actually call themselves a dietitian. So your GP can refer you to the HSC for a dietitian, or you can look on a website called sedi.ie, and they will have a list of dietitians who are in private practice that you can get in contact with as well. So that's everything that I wanted to cover with you today. I think we have some time for questions now, if anybody has any.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for that really interesting talk. So I've seen some great questions coming in throughout the talk. So we look forward to answering these as part of our live Q&A session after the two talks. I'm now delighted to introduce you to our second and final speaker for this evening, Joanna. Joanna is a clinical psychotherapist and attachment specialist with over 15 years experience working with children and families. Joanna is going to talk to us about parenting through a pandemic. Again, can I kindly ask you to post any questions you have for Joanna in the chat box, and we'll answer them as part of the live Q&A session after the talks.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Joanna Fortune, and I'm here to talk to you about parenting the parent, parental stamina, parental esteem, and really looking at that through the lens of COVID-19, and in particular, what impact has COVID-19 had on all of us in our parenting lives, not just other aspects of our lives, and what is the role of play and moreover playfulness in finding our way out of that. So I'm going to start by just briefly introducing myself. I may have spoken to some of you before at a previous event, and perhaps there's more of you here who I have not met or spoken with. I'm Joanna Fortune. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, as well as a fully certified TheraPlay practitioner, supervisor, and trainer. TheraPlay is a very particular dyadic form of psychotherapy. It's very relationship focused and it's play based, but it has the relationship in the room rather than looking at just the child or just the parent. We look at the relationship between the two. It's an attachment and trauma focused way of working. I'm also, for my sins, a doctoral candidate with Middlesex University at the moment. So that has, you know, when you say, what did you do? What task did you undertake in COVID? Mine was a doctorate, and I'm not quite sure why I did that to myself, but almost through it, almost there in the home stretch now. And actually in that doctorate, what I'm looking at is exactly my 15-minute parenting model, because I'm the author of these 3 books, 15-minute parenting as a series. The first is 0 to 7 years, then there's 8 to 12 years, and then there's the teenage years. I'm currently, alongside the doctorate, working on my 4th book in this series. The 4th book is going to focus on the role of play and playfulness in our adult lives. So I was really delighted to talk to you about this particular theme today, and to look at how play and playfulness could be a solution to a lot of the challenges that have emerged for many of us, if not most of us, in this pandemic period in our parenting lives. So 15-minute parenting is a therapeutic play-based parenting model. Very importantly, it is intended to be self-directed. It is contained within the books, and it is supported by other work that I do, such as my own podcast, weekly 15-minute parenting, same name, and each episode is 15 minutes long, and that is there to support the model and people who access me through the books. But also I am the weekly parenting consultant on News Talk FM on the Sean Moncrief Show, and generally I contribute on relevant topics to my field in the media around mental health, parenting and child development, and increasingly adolescence as well. But as I said, one of the things that is really interesting, or certainly what I have found, is in the time between writing the first book and now planning the 4th book, there has been a big landscape shift in terms of how we view play, and moreover play in our adult lives. Because actually what I've been seeing, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is that one of the things I put into my first book was encouraging couples, parents to play with each other. You know, if you're single parenting, to have a playful partner in your life. And I suggested some playful activities, and without exception, parents contacted me saying, yeah, I mean, I get it cognitively, but I got to tell you, that feels really weird. It feels really awkward. I'm not sure I could do that. That's not how I relate. And now, and that would have been, I wrote that book in 2017, it published 2018. And now here we are 2021, and I'm actually getting requests from organizations, corporates, as well as the media to speak about this play for adults. What does that look and feel like? So I've seen a big change over the couple of years, but you know, it would be naive not to look at what role has the pandemic had in reshining a light on the role of play and playfulness in our lives. So that's something I'm going to think a bit with you today as part of what I'm doing. So staying on that theme of play and playfulness, and just to really sort of clarify how I understand play. I would very much say play is a language. It is the language of children, and moreover, it is a universal language between parents and children. I always think, you know, there's a Hungarian psychoanalyst, Ferenczi, and he wrote in one of his papers about it, what he called a confusion of tongues. And really this was around, you know, adults and children, we seem to speak the same language, but actually we're separated by this cognitive, emotional gap or chasm between us that actually, you know, renders us into this state of permanent misunderstanding. And I actually think that's so relevant, because in parenting, and I know it within your work as much as mine, we hear this quite often. You know, parents will say, look, I think I've been really clear. I said it to him. I said it appropriately. I had eye contact, and, you know, I don't know why he didn't do what I asked him to do. And actually, you know, a child cannot know the adult's mind, but we do know their mind. It's just that we have been taught to forget the experience of the child's mind. We've been taught through growing up in the adult world and what it puts on us that actually, you know, children's minds work in a very different way. When they're looking at us and they've got that eye contact and we're talking, initially we feel, yeah, got that moment of meeting, that connection, we're talking together, and then their attention has gone. They're looking to the side of us, around us, above us. They see a cobweb, they're thinking, oh, look at the cobweb, there could be a spider in there. Oh, Charlotte's Web is such a good story. Oh, Incy Wincy Spider makes me laugh. And they're off on another tangent. And then we say those all important words as parents. Are you listening to me? And every child on the planet knows the default answer to that question is yes. Does it mean they were actually listening? No, absolutely not. Does it mean that they took in what we were saying? Less likely even than that. So we have to think about how we bid to connect with our children and how we communicate our intentions, our desires, what we want from them, what we expect from them, and think like a child, or at least begin to embrace the mind of a child within our own mind. Children do their communication rather than speak it. And that is why play is their language, but it is something that we've all been children. So if we can get back to playfulness, we have that shared way of learning and making sense together. Because for me, play is more than a box of toys in the corner of a room. Play is a state of mind and a way of being. Because often when you say to parents, do you play? They're thinking, well, yes, we do jigsaws, we do board games, we play. But actually the question is, are you playful in how you parent? Do you have that playful, creative, imaginative, wondering, what if state of mind? Because as soon as you are wondering, you're imagining. And as soon as you're imagining, you're playful. And that's really what we're looking to be within our parents and our parenting, or rather our parent-child connection. So in this way, play is the route to making meaning of our experiences in life and of making meaning of our relationships with others. So more simply put, play is always the way that we look at how does a child internalize a sense of self. That is an understanding of who they are and who they are to people outside of them within the world around them. We'll call that an inner working model. An inner working model is that view of self as being good, deserving of good things, worthy, you know, good things will happen to me. My view of others is they are safe, trustworthy, will take care of me, want the best for me. And the world is a safe, exciting place where good things happen and it's worth getting involved in. If I was to have a more negative inner working model, because maybe I've had negative early childhood experiences and there are deeper issues in the parent-child relationship that have resulted in me having a negative inner working model, that means not so much that I think bad things happen to me in my view of self, but I am the bad thing. Other people are scary, unsafe, unpredictable, untrustworthy. They'll hurt me, they'll scare me. And the world is a scary place where, you know, if I do go out, I go out poised to fight with my fists raised up, or I retreat like a turtle into a shell and I shut down. I'm like, I don't want to go out there. Bad things will happen to me. I'm scared. We want to use play as the route to help well, children certainly, but also as parents, help the parent-child relationship to create a shared meaning, to create a new rhythm, a new synchrony of the relationship that offers that opportunity for moments of meeting, which is another way of saying connection, and opportunities for shared joy. That is, that my child gets the experience of being enjoyed by another, therefore knowing they are enjoyable, because it is only by experiencing being enjoyed by my safe, trusted adult in charge that I grow up into a person capable of joy and enjoying life. So I have to be enjoyed so that I can enjoy. Play is the landscape for that. Play is where that all is carried out. And play is how we deepen our understanding of ourselves within the world. So I really want to highlight that when we think about play, it's not just sitting with board games. It's, you know, eye contact and smiles, it's singing, it's joking, it's having fun together, it's simply enjoying each other. And that doesn't take a fanfare. That's about the relationship. And then it's playful. And I love this little image from the New Yorker magazine. You know, you have a child blowtorching the words, "I need love," onto the wall, and the parent going, "Don't be paying any attention to him now. He's just doing that to get attention." How often do we hear that? How often do we hear children's behaviors being dismissed, minimized, explained away as attention seeking? How often, if we're really honest with ourselves as professionals, have we done that? Have we said, "Oh, it's just attention seeking"? And actually what I would find that often what is dismissed as attention seeking behavior is moreover connection seeking behavior. Okay. Parenting is about connection, and play fuels connection. That is why we must play as parents, we must play with our children, and we must as adults embrace play and its important role in all of our lives. And that's something I'm happy to talk a bit more about in questions if anybody would like any clarity on that. But I just wanted to set the scene because I am going to look at, you know, what is the direct impact on parents. But I also think that, you know, as we go into that, you know, thinking about COVID, I just think about, let's get a baseline first. What is the parent-child relationship? Where does it grow and thrive? Where is it at its best? And then let's look at what the impact all of this has had on it and on parents in general. I mean, I believe that there is no better way to discover your own unresolved issues than to become a parent, because becoming a parent and facing the daily demands and needs of children will bring our own unresolved issues not just bubbling to the surface, but screaming and howling to the surface. You know, we will rediscover issues we didn't even know we had because we buried them so deep so long ago. And our children, our relationship with them will bring that to the surface. Why? Well, because our children are of us. We will see aspects of our own childhood experiences and ourselves when we are engaged with them. I would go so far as to say that by the time parents, by the time let's own this and our own parent selves as well, those of us who are parents, by the time we snap at our children, you know, by the time we lose it and we yell, it's rarely because of what our child has done at that stage. And it is more often because of what got activated or triggered within me by them doing or saying the thing they were doing or saying. And so we want to move this to a place of parenting in a more creative and playful way. And to do that, we have to reflect inwards to connect outwards. And that is the essence of 15-minute parenting, but it's the essence of therapeutic parenting and playful parenting as a mindset. I need to get curious and not certain. And that's really hard as a parent because we love to be certain. I mean, who doesn't love to be right? We do. Anyone who's ever had a bruise on their hand and you know it hurts, but you keep touching it to make sure it still hurts. We love to be right about things, even the bad things, even the painful things. And this playful parenting is actually about pulling ourselves out of that place of certainty to take up and assume a position of curiosity. That is to say, I don't know everything, but I am seeking to better understand. I am seeking to discover what's going on for you and what your lived experience is. And I think that that's something that we have to really work at. I don't say that lightly because I know how difficult and challenging that can be. I remember on the radio show some time ago, I answered a parenting question about a parent who actually very bravely, very honestly wrote in and said, you know, the tantrums I'm seeking support with are not my children's, they're my own. How do I manage my parent tantrums? And I loved that phrase because I think there was I imagined in the moment so many people would relate to it. And I think I said that in answering it. But actually, the response I gave and that segment of the radio, I still, over a year later, hear from parents saying, I want to know more about that. Gosh, that's me too. I relate to that. And I think there is something universal about that experience of out of control that has been amplified during this pandemic time. And I really think that this is something people are interested in, intrigued by, and dare I say it, curious about, but actually it's very hard to unlearn the things we do to do it differently, because how we experienced being parented in our own childhoods is going to directly influence and inform the kind of parents we become with our own children. Our own early childhood experiences can leave us with what we might call a mental blind spot, making it very challenging to really see and feel what our children need from us in a particular moment, and actually in those especially tense, emotional, aroused moments. And I think that's really, really relevant. I also think insecurity in our own early attachments can contribute to a current sense of unfulfillment or disappointment, or that sense of, gosh, when I imagined parenting, I didn't think I'd be this parent. I thought I'd be one of those beautiful, glossy, filtered Instagram parents who are nailing life and everything is always wonderful. And lo and behold, that's not the case. And that can be a crushing reality to adjust to. I think it's really important, though, that as parents, as caregiving adults, as important adults in the lives of children, because I really do think this stretches further than parents, that it's really important we value ourselves enough. And we value ourselves enough to know that we can respond to these feelings, that we can and must take care of ourselves, that we deserve that, so that we can take care of the children in our lives and respond to their needs in an attuned, securely attached way. Because before our children can self-regulate their emotional states, they co-regulate in response to their important adults, parents, carers, teachers, health workers, social care workers, social workers, sports coaches, whoever you might be. Our children co-regulate with us. And this is also, I do want to clarify, when I say, children co-regulate with adults, it's presupposing that the adult in question has developed their own capacity to emotionally self-regulate. And we know that's not always true, because if we didn't have access to a co-regulating adult in our own lives growing up, how do you give what you never got yourself? And that is where you say, oh gosh, alarm bell ringing there. That's a bit, kind of getting a bit hot and sweaty listening to that, Joanna. That's sounding very real and to the bone. Then fear not, because actually relational repair is always possible, and therapeutic parenting, playful parenting is a wonderful way to get us there. In my work, and again in the 15-minute parenting model I developed, I always start with a parental self-audit. It's like an interview, but it's very much about that reflection. The important thing is that we don't just ask our questions as we go through things like that, but we also stop to answer them. I think we're great people for asking questions. What did I do before this? And we never stop to actually answer and go, well, let's think, what did I do? So the audit is about, questions like, what was it like growing up in your family? In what ways was your relationship with your mother similar or different to your relationship with your father? Is it still the same as you grew up? Did that change from early childhood to mid-childhood to teenage years and young adulthood? How were you disciplined as a child, and how did it make you feel then? And how does it make you feel to think back on that now? And what we're looking for there is some evidence of reflective functioning. Can we as adults recall something from the past, but from a position of fresh thinking and new perspective? So in recalling it, it doesn't re-traumatize me. It doesn't upset me as if it happened yesterday. I can recall it and say, it was very upsetting. And now that I think back, this is the meaning I have made of that experience, or not. And otherwise, how can we do things like that? So the audit goes through a lot of questions like that to bring us to a place about how did we experience being parented? How are we currently parenting? How do those two contribute to each other? And that all important question, how do I wish it had been? And whatever the answer to that question is, I like to take that as our starting point. Okay, that's how it was. This is how it is. Let's go with how you wish it had been. What can we creatively and playfully do to build more of that and to create a landscape in a relationship with your parent where that's what you're looking at? That is the view, how you wish it had been. And I think that that's something that comes up so often in my work that, as I said on the radio, when it came up, it was a great opportunity to really talk and highlight that. Again, another little image from the New Yorker, and this one, in case you can't read it clearly, reads, "Tread lightly, mother. This is a very formative time for me," in how we play with our children, and that all important question, should we always let them win? I think that's so important, because no is the answer, but we should let them win more often than they lose. Like, if you're doing the best of 3, they should win 2 out of 3. And I think when we're playing, be aware of what gets activated and triggered in us, particularly around challenge play, board games, games that have that kind of best of 3, best of 10, winning, losing, who's the quickest, who's the fastest, those kinds of games. Be aware, do they trigger your own competitive spirit? And where does that come from? Were you the competitive sibling in your family? And if you can't be honest yourself about that or clear, imagine I was asking your sibling that question about you. What would they say about you? And then we'll take half of what they say, because we all know they'll blow it out of proportion as well. I like this quote from Donald Winnicott, a very famous child psychoanalyst in Britain. And in 1971, in his book, Playing and Reality, he wrote that whatever I say about children playing really applies to adults too. So I mean, I can imagine the reaction I got to talking about the need for play in our adult lives in 2017. I can only imagine what Donald Winnicott was met with in 1971 when he's saying, hey, actually, this is about you guys too. It's the exact same. We dismiss play, and this is a big part of the challenge with the pandemic, with parenting, with stressed out parents, low parental stamina, is that we dismiss play as something that belongs in childhood. You know, it belongs in the realm and time of childhood. It has no place in the seriousness of adult lives. But actually, you know, my challenge to that is always that play is a serious business with serious impact in our lives. And again, it's about how we understand and define play. The artist Pablo Picasso, he actually said, you know, everything we can imagine is real. And I love that, because I always think that there's something that we have to bridge that gap between, you know, what's real and not real, and play is the beautiful thing that can do that. Think about it like, you know, while we're trained in the course of growing up to renounce nonsense, you know, renounce silliness and play and disorder and chaos and get serious. And look at, of course, there are serious parts of our lives and there are things we have to be responsible and accountable for. I don't mean to infer otherwise, but it shouldn't be at a cost of play and playfulness in our lives. I really think that we have to think about that. You know, we play with language. You know, we're born as infants, we're born into a sea of language. We're born into a sea of sound and phoneme. And phoneme is that lovely, and kids do this beautifully, but you know where they make meaning out of sound, like oops, uh-oh, bump, 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 ouch. Those kinds of sounds, they have meaning for children. And that's a phoneme, a sound that has meaning. And even within families, we all have our little code of what a special sound or word meant in our families. We're playful, we play with it. And that kind of playfulness with language gives us that sensuous experience in our mouth. That playfulness returns later when we develop an interest in poetry or singing or music in general. That's playing with language, isn't it? When we speak in a playful way, it is with a rich prosody of voice. That is pitch, pace, tone, musicality. You know, you play with an infant, you could be talking about anything. They're not getting the meaning of your words, but they get the meaning in how you say it, the emotional resonance, that kind of, we're going down the stairs, we're going outside, it's a lovely day. The child is hearing ba-da-da, da-da-da, ba-ba-ba-da. They're hearing the sounds, and that is how they build connection and they create meaning. We're doing it without thinking. Nobody says, oh, great prosody, you're nailing that. We tend to notice these things when they don't happen rather than when they do. But I really think that's something that we have to embrace, because play is activating. It mobilizes our own inner working model, that sense of self, others, and the world. So we have to reflect on our own relationship with play. One of the things I think in our adult lives that's really relevant is, you know, that sense, and I'm saying, you know, because I think we all do know this, that sense we have at times, hopefully it's at times and not permanently, of feeling blocked, just feeling, you know, that sense of stuckness. Oh, I just feel a bit stuck. I feel a bit immobilized. I don't know what to do. I can't get up and go. I've lost my, whatever you call it, my mojo, my va-va-voom. You know, you're feeling blocked, in other words. And when we feel blocked within ourselves or within our lives, that is actually an acknowledgement of how we have forgotten our need to play. Play will unstick us. It will move us forward, because play is activating, is mobilizing. It creates something new. And in that creating something new, it moves, it catapults us forward. And I think that that's really attainable, actually, when we think of it like that. So I'm just going to finish off with some of this because I want to spend the end of my time with you talking about actual activities, because I often, when I do a presentation like this on a topic like this, people will say, oh, you know, that sounds great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the sound of that, but how, Joanna, how do we do it? So reassured, if you're sitting with that in your head at the moment, I'm going to leave you with very practical games, activities that can be played on those low parental stamina days, because I think that's really important. The greatest tool that we have at our disposal as important adults, again, parents, yes, but any important adult in the lives of children, is to prevent the emergence of psychopathology. Psychopathology is any, you know, emotional or behavioral symptomology that might emerge in children, is to increase their capacity for playful connection in parents. Okay, because if I am a playful parent and I bid to connect and moreover stay connected with my child or children in a playful way, and I create those regular opportunities for shared joy and moments of meeting, and we play in our home, and that's something that my child doesn't have to earn with me. They don't have to have a good star chart from Monday through Friday so that I'll play with them. And you know, on their days when their behavior is particularly challenging and under pressure, I don't withdraw or withhold play. In fact, I increase it because I understand that playing with them in that very connected way will enable them to process whatever is underpinning that challenging behavior. So that's why I say 15-minute parenting. I don't for one moment think you can parent your children in 15 minutes. Imagine if I created that, lads, I could retire and never work a day in my life. I know it's more than that, but 15-minute parenting is a direct result of my clinical work, during which I heard from busy parents, say, who work outside of home. Busy working parents would say, look, by the time we finish work, negotiate traffic, do the childcare pickup, get home, get a supper on the table that is at least mostly healthy. We're lucky if we have 15 minutes before we have to negotiate bedtime. What can you do in 15 minutes? And out of that emerged, I used to give people fridge notes, like little printed sheets that you could stick to the fridge, quick things you could do in 15 minutes. I was developing play packs. Here's things that you can have in the car, games to play on the move, games to play on public transport, so that playfulness was in there. And then the model emerged, because if we have a predictable window of time in our day, every day, our children are less likely to pull out of us and whine and whinge and come to me, as soon as we're through the door, because they can trust, I know you're coming to me and we're going to play together before we go to bed. And playing before bed is a great way, having fun, genuine, authentic laughter, great way to release residual tension that any of us are holding throughout our day, adults as well as children. So that is the best way that we can strengthen relationships, strengthen and enhance connection, and decrease the emergence of challenging behaviors, we might call it, or in my world, we'd call it psychopathologies. So play is essential in helping us regardless of age. And I say this genuinely because I have been in an elder person's home where there was a cotton ball snowball fight done with marshmallows, and ladies over 75 years old pelting each other with marshmallows, and peals of laughter and shared joy, and feeling a lot better and a lot more connected at the end of it. Regardless of our age, we need to play in order to reach our potential and to increase our understanding of who we are as people. And that is changing. Who we are as people is not linear. It changes. We have good days, we have bad days. I know the internet tries to create this new reality where you're not allowed to have a bad day, you're not allowed to make a mistake because you'll be cancelled. Actually, we're denying ourselves a very human opportunity for growth and development if we foreclose on bad days and foreclose on mistakes. Because if we don't normalize having the odd bad day within context and it being transient, you know, then actually every time someone has a challenge, they're going to feel like, oh, I'm not sad, I'm depressed, oh, I'm not worried, I'm full-blown anxious, and things get amplified. This play and playfulness will help us understand all of the facets to us, because do you know what? There is a darkness in play as well. Play isn't all just laughter and mirth and lightness. There's a darkness in play, and it is just as important as the lightness that is there, because a fully lived life has both dark and light experiences, and therefore play enables a fully lived life. And I don't say that lightly, because this is literally what I do, and I've seen the results of both lack of playfulness and also high levels, and it's always worth embracing play. Michael Rosen, the children's writer, children's poet himself, who was very sick with COVID over the COVID-19 actually, and is making a gradual recovery. But he released a book in 2019. It's simply called Play. I think it has a yellow cover. It's very playful looking. But one of the lines in that really jumped out at me was that play is a form of experimentation that loosens the often rigid boundaries of our very structured world. Because he hasn't written that book about play for children, it's play in general, and very much saying adults need to play. And you know, when we think about it in that way, over the COVID period, our worlds were upended. They changed dramatically and they changed very suddenly. And we didn't get warning. And for many of us that maybe worked outside of home and our children were in maybe 40, 50-hour-a-week childcare or going to school and aftercare, all of a sudden we were together for very long unbroken periods for maybe the first time in many years. You know, our children were growing up and they weren't getting in the car and going to their childcare. They were staying with us and we were staying with them. And I think at the beginning of all of it, if we were having this conversation maybe even a year ago, it would be quite different. There was a bit of a novelty factor in, oh, this is great, it's a great opportunity, we're all going to benefit from this. And largely speaking, children under 7, because their important hub of social development is their parents, their siblings, they did do really well in that time because they got all of that pro-social gain from that increased time with parents. Children in middle childhood, 8 to 12 years, particularly 10, 11 upwards to mid-adolescence, 15, 16 years old, they struggled from the get-go because their important hub of social development is anyone but their parents. It is their outside world, their peer group, and at a time of important, rich brain development, they were denied those opportunities. So actually we have had to experiment with the rules as we knew them, the routines as we knew them. We've had to challenge boundaries and limit setting without losing them. And I think it has brought up for me the value of structure over rules. Rules are rigid. Rules are inflexible. This is how it is. No leeway, no wiggle room. Structure is different. Structure provides scaffolding within which I am free to express myself and make moves and choices and have a desire and have good days and bad days, because structure bends without breaking. It adapts and it hasn't got that rigidity. It has more flexibility. Play is about flexibility and adaptability and mindset. So play, when I say play, I don't mean woohoo, you know, everything goes, anything's possible. I play within structure is really, really important. And I think that can be reassuring when we're talking about this with parents and inviting parents to increase their playfulness. Honestly, we have never needed play in our lives more than in this last year. You know, my question really is around, can we emerge from this pandemic in a more playful state of mind? And what might that mean for us, you know, both culturally as well as societally? What would it mean if we were more playful? And if experimenting with sourdough starter and baking banana bread 26 different ways and taking up cross stitch or knitting or skipping or doing art, you know, if all of us who've read or music, I'm going to learn an instrument, I'm going to play music, we're playing. Something in us innately knows, I need that creativity, I need that expression. We are embodied people, and that is what's going to bridge me between mind and body. And I think that's really, really important when we think about the impact. Just this picture should, you know, I could leave it at this picture. It says all there is to say, but I'm here now to talk to you about parental stamina for the last piece of our talk. Parental stamina is something that, a phrase for me that makes a lot of sense in my work. It's something I hear. It's how I describe that drive that somehow keeps us all going as parents. I think parental stamina is a great tool for checking in with ourselves, and we often forget to do that. And particularly over the pandemic, I'm more often asked about, how has this affected children? How has it affected teenagers? What if the baby's born in a pandemic? What does it mean for them and their sociability? And very rarely am I asked, what about parents? How have they done in this pandemic? And parental stamina allows us to see where our energy levels, our focus levels are at on a given day, or do you know what, a given time of a given day sometimes. And, you know, we will have that sense in us from time to time that we just don't have it. You know, we just don't have it in us to be our most playfully engaging, connected parent selves. Just going, you know, I just can't do it. I can't look at another Sylvanian family. I can't look at another Lego block. I just can't do it today. And our efforts to playfully engage or, you perhaps directly play in that more direct way with our children, in those days will be lackluster at best. And that, of course, I mean, don't you know it? Of course, they're the days when our children seem to demand even more of us. And maybe it's not that they're demanding more, it's just we're experiencing it as more because we're running so empty. And I think I've often heard, that phrase, parenting is a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I don't really relate to that, because even a marathon ends after 26.2 grueling miles and you get to have a hot bath and a nice meal and a rest. Yeah, that doesn't always apply with parenting. Parenting is 24/7, and there are highs and lows, and there's supposed to be this emotional regulatory roller coaster for both us and our children. We move through our day, not in spikes, hopefully, but in this wave of mild, moderate, and high level energy engagement. We come up, we come down, we come up, we come down, and sometimes it gets out of control, and then we try to get back in control. And that process of getting out of sync and then back into sync is what enables the growth and development piece. But I think because parenting is so permanent and all-consuming, it can actually be very, very difficult to build in that all-important time for self-care. And I almost cringe or want to do those air quotes, self-care. I don't mean, or I certainly don't just mean having a bath, doing a colouring book, or walking the dog. I mean, honestly, if walking the dog is the one you say that's my self-care, you need something else, because part of the responsibility of being a dog owner is walking the dog. You need something that is for you. And those of us, it's healthcare professionals, by the way, I know that's not what we're talking about today, but those of us in a healthcare professional role, we especially need to invest in self-care, because ours is a therapeutic self-care. It needs to be more strategic, it needs to be more structured, and it needs to be adhered to for us to survive our work and to survive it intact, moreover, that we enjoy our work rather than endure it. But equally, parental stamina is about parents enjoying rather than enduring. But parental esteem, and if you're having more of those low parental stamina days, and look, we can all go through phases of that, and COVID has been particularly hard. You've had to parent like you're not working, work like you're not parenting. And oh, by the way, follow a primary or secondary school curriculum that you've no training in. And could you, by the way, not drop either of the other two balls while taking that one up? Oh, and by the way, play with your kids and be pleasant about it. I mean, talk about being set up to fail. I think that parents have been forgotten and overlooked and overburdened, and the whole care industry, because I do a lot of work with residential care teams for adolescents, and I've seen this, have been so undervalued, underappreciated, and taken for granted. So if others aren't going to invest in us, we have to invest in ourselves. And our parental esteem may well have taken a battering over this time period. And so finding time for self-care can be very, very difficult. So plan your play for the armchair day. That is your new tagline. Give yourself permission, and the parents you work with, to have an armchair day. Those days when you don't want to get out of your armchair, you don't want to play, you don't want to do anything, you just want to sit in your chair. Fear not, I have play for those days. For example, you could do some popcorn storytelling. I love storytelling because stories allow us to suspend the conflict between reality and creativity. Stories are a great way of investing in shared language. I call it popcorn storytelling because that's what I knew it to be called, but I've said this to someone before who said they'd never heard that phrase. But it's the idea that you start with the kernel of a story and expand it and pop it out. So you don't need any props for this. You start the story: once upon a time there was a little brown mouse who lived in a big green field. And then you pause, and your child or children, this is a more the merrier one, you all take turns adding in and expanding the story together. You can do that from your armchair. Play a game of what am I thinking? Again, you don't need any props, just yourself. By props, I mean toys, by the way. You don't need any play props. Just sit silently and invite your child to read your mind by your body language and your facial expression. So give them something to work with, and after they give you two guesses, maybe right or wrong, tell them the third one was correct. And then ask them to do it and you guess theirs, and then take turns and over and back with that. You don't have to leave your armchair for it. Create a busy box. This is one you would have to do in advance, by the way. This is one that takes a bit of, plan your play, and the things that are in this box should be selected, not just randomly collected. But you could create a busy box for each of your children ahead of time. The rule is that the box only gets pulled out in cases of low parental stamina. You don't have to tell your children that, it's just for you to know. And you keep what's in the box off limits most of the time, which makes it a bit more enticing and exciting and engaging when they do get to access it. I would suggest you put any bits that you know will interest your child. Now the Tiger is back open, it's like fabulous for all this stuff. You can get putty, little tubs of it, maybe building blocks or Legos, maybe a puzzle, crayons, toy animals, paper, little bits and bobs that you can put in there, and it's a busy box for your child. And you have a hot cup of tea while they play with their busy box. And if they disengage with the box is going away, so they have to make the most of it. You could also, again, this is one that you put a small bit of planning in. Build a fort, you know, and you just set this up yourself, couple of chairs, blankets, cushions, you know how to do it. Build a little tent fort, put a snack inside, a little torch, some books, and invite them to get in there, have their lunch or their snack inside the fort and play in their fort while you sit on your armchair and just let them at it. Silent messages is another one for these days. No props are needed. You sit opposite each other. For example, you blow kisses, wave, smile, do a little wiggle, make shapes, you know, as in shape a heart out of your hands, something like that. But just passing silent messages over and back to each other that serve and return playful function. Or plan a nurture afternoon. Keep it even more simple by bringing the duvet from the bed upstairs, playing a movie, being playful with this, especially if it's one of those 2 movie days. We all know what those days are like. You might say, this was my favorite movie when I was your age. What's your favorite movie? And you watch one or other, or perhaps both if it's an extreme low stamina day. Have a snack and just snuggle up under the duvet. That's playful, that's connecting, that's nurturing. Equally, you could get a basin of water and do mini manicure, pedicure, warm soapy water, soft fluffy towel, nice lotion, lots of deep pressure touch. Really nice way of doing nurture. Balloon volleyball, blow up a balloon, you sit and just hit it back and forwards between you, okay? Beat the clock, you set a timer, so that's all you need. You just sit still otherwise, and set a challenge. I wonder how long it would take you to run out through the kitchen, out the back, around the garden 3 times, back in, and then hop on one leg 3 times. Let's see how long that takes you. Increase the challenge if they're a bit older to keep it engaging, and see if they can achieve that task before the timer runs out. Something like that. Wriggle worm, because we all have those little kids that as soon as they see us sitting down, they think that's an invitation to treat us like a bouncy castle and jump and climb all over us. You don't need any props for this one. You hold them gently yet firmly. Don't hold them too tight, because then it'll force them to buck wildly and they could fall and hurt themselves. But you don't want it to be too loose that they get free too quickly. So gently yet firmly, they wriggle, 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 and they wriggle themselves out of your hold. We call it in my house actually a don't let go hug. And then there's a safe word, you know, when she says presto, then the let go happens. Otherwise she wriggles, and she's getting that lovely proprioceptive input as she's moving around within the loop of my arms. But we can do that sitting down. You could also then have them wriggle like a worm all over the room, behind the sofa, over here, over there, and expand that. And a scavenger hunt, which again does take a little bit of advanced planning, because you want to plan some clues and create a map. But this is something like the busy box that you plan when your energy is good and you break out when your energy is low. If it's planned correctly, hiding clues around, you could get 30 to 45 minutes out of that, particularly if they're a bit older. So that's one to invest in. Have a sort of level 1, level 2, level 3 scavenger hunt planned. So I just wanted to be cognizant of time, because I think our question and answer time in this type of talk is really, really important. And I wanted to make sure we did have time. You can find me on social media, these platforms. Don't message me parenting questions on social media, because I'm not able to answer them and I don't always get to see them. But you can certainly keep an eye where I post some playful tips, little ideas like I just shared with you in the armchair play. And if nothing else, remind yourselves and everyone else that you're working with that I wonder is an indispensable life and play skill. Because if you're wondering, you're imagining. If you're imagining, you're playing. And just even pretending to be someone else, the world of pretending to be someone else and acting out their feelings and actions is how we develop a capacity for empathy. But it can also give us a much needed escape from ourselves and whatever's going on for us. And it can, in that all important way, it can unstick us when we feel blocked in ourselves and our lives. We've never needed this more than in this pandemic and post-pandemic time, but I do feel that we shouldn't see play as, oh God, we'll have to get play to get better. But actually we see, now that we're back, let's see play as back to basics and keep it up. stay playful, and be creative and imaginative in how we move forward, embracing family life. I hope that has addressed everything you hoped it to address, but as I said, I look forward to your questions now.
So thank you, Joanna, for another great talk. We're now ready to begin our live Q&A session. So we've had some really interesting and diverse questions coming through throughout the talks. So we hope to get through as many of these as we can before we close for the evening. So just looking at some of the questions here, the first question I can see here is for Sarah. So Sarah, what is the best way to get your child to sit and eat by themselves, especially when they refuse to eat anything that you've made? Do you give them choices, or do you stay firm and get them to eat what you've made? Sorry, a few questions here. Thank you.
Okay. It's, you know, we could spend a week on that one on its their own. I mean, it's very hard to make a child eat. And I think if you have a child who doesn't want to eat what you've served, there's a couple of things to think about. And I'll go through probably the most common problem one, which is a lot of kids are arriving at dinner and they're actually have eaten all they need already that day and they're just not hungry. So the commonest reason when I'd see parents for fussy eating, it turns out the child has just had too many snacks in the day. So that by the time they hit dinner, they're just not ready. So, you know, sometimes, you know, particularly toddlers, they need 3 meals a day, but they probably only need 2 snacks. Whereas sometimes I'm seeing kids grazing all day long, and even if they're grazing on fruit or rice cakes or stuff like that, it's still a lot of food for a small child. So I would always say, if you have a child who kind of sits down and is not interested in eating dinner, check if they're getting lots of treats, even just snacks through it, and that you need to make sure there's at least 2 hours between snack and dinner. So what I'd often see is kids who maybe are going to creche and they have breakfast snack, lunch snack, and then they have a tea in the creche, and then they come home and parents are trying to give them a dinner as well. They're never going to eat it. So I think just don't force that one too much. Check, are they hungry? In terms of other things, it's if the child is genuinely hungry, I would always say kids are allowed at least 5 foods that they don't like. But after that, I think it's a mistake to give them their favorite meal every day. There is a little bit of this is dinner, but what you can also do is it's okay if they actually don't eat dinner now and again. I think sometimes we're nearly terrified that they're going to absolutely die of starvation at 2 o'clock in the morning if they didn't eat their dinner. Now, if they don't eat their dinner every night, that's a different story. But I think if they're getting food they like 5 nights a week, and then twice a week you're just giving them what everybody else is having, I wouldn't be terribly upset if they didn't eat much or any of it. I wouldn't fight over it though.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So the next 2 questions I can see are quite similar, so I might answer the 2 of these together. So the question is, how much milk should a toddler have to meet their dietary requirements? And how much milk do they need, as my 3-year-old has gone way off it? So I suppose to answer this, from about a year on, your child will start to eat larger, more regular meals. And they will start to get most of their nutrition from foods other than milk. So it is really important that, I suppose, toddlers, they're not given more than the recommended amount of milk as a drink, as this can reduce their solid food intake. That said, milk still remains a key food, and generally a daily intake of about 550 ml of milk or equivalent amounts of yogurt and cheese would be recommended. So what does that look like for your toddler? So it could be 250 ml beakers of milk alongside some yogurt or cheese for calcium. And then after that, the main drink for toddlers should be water. And I suppose just to add then the types of milks that are obviously suitable for toddlers, so they can have breast milk, fortified full fat milk, or toddler milks can be offered. And just to add as well that toddler milks can contribute to the intake of iron, vitamin D and omega fatty acids in toddlers as well. So looking back to the questions here, so another good question here, I think this one is for yourself, Joanna. Mm-hmm. So Joanna, do you have any advice on how to manage tantrums in public?
Run for cover. Do you know, I always think tantrums in public are almost like a rite of passage for both a toddler and a parent, because everybody's been here. And in those awful moments when you cringe and you imagine everybody staring at you and judging you and assessing your parenting, rest assured they're not. They're just looking over, glad it's not them, because everybody's been there. And I think tantrums, in its purest sense, if we take them, they're very much about a performance, aren't they? It's a way that our children use their overt behavior, you know, what they're doing and saying is underpinned by that physical and emotional state. So if I'm out in public with you, is it that I'm tired? That we've been out and about all day and actually I'm pretty much done? Could I be getting hungry? Might I be thirsty? I'd always throw in there, could I be unwell or brewing something? Because let's be honest, none of us are our joyous best when we're not feeling well. And toddlers have behavior because they don't have that emotional fluency to say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed and perturbed at the long day I've had. I'm kind of done. Will we call it a day and go home? They can't do that. So instead they sabotage, they have this tantrum. A tantrum is very developmentally appropriate, parentally challenging, but developmentally appropriate around that time when we're putting in boundaries and limits and we're saying, no, you can't have ice cream, you have to have your dinner. No, we can't stay in the park because it's getting dark, we have to go home. No, we can't do this because, and we give this. So our toddlers are likely to accept, well, that's unlikely, let's be honest, test or defy the limit. They get loud, they get physical, they get demonstrative, and we call it a tantrum. It's really them doing their job. It's what we do in response. We have to hold the boundary gently yet firmly in place because we're modeling, it's okay for you to be displeased about this, but I'm the person who is going to hold the scaffolding, hold the structure in place, and I will stop you, the situation and your behavior getting out of control. And always hold in mind, thank you for those boundaries said. No child ever. They're not going to thank you for this. You're not getting a high five. They're not going to say great parenting. You nailed that. But they thank us in how they live, that they're able to hit that internal brake light. They're able to develop delayed gratification capacities, impulse control, you know, within their behavior. That's how they let us know it's working for me. This is suiting me. A tantrum is usually, now it can feel interminable when you're in it, but usually it's a few minutes long. And so long as the child is safe, you can say, okay, when you're done with this, I'm right here for you with hugs and you come to me. If we're talking about a meltdown, I know we use this language interchangeably, but actually, Michelle, those are different things. Like a meltdown is when I've become so sensorially overstimulated that I cannot self-regulate, but I cannot be co-regulated either. I've just gone up, up, up. And really what you're trying to do there is damage limitation. You're just trying to separate me from the action, you know, in other words, whatever is going on, keep me safe and let this run its course while you're there to witness. Keep a distance, obviously, because meltdowns can be physical as well. And just to say, look, it's going to be okay. I'm right here. And as soon as your child is calming from a meltdown, I find taking an approach that really resets a busy, agitated brain would be to change the field of vision, and to do it quite quickly is whatever or wherever you are. Ideally get outside, and if not, turn and look out of a window. Because as soon as you're not looking at whatever's going on in front of you and you're looking out of the window, you've changed the field of vision. And what you're doing there is trying to short circuit the arousal. And while you're looking out the window, find with your child, especially when they're little, 5 things that they can see. You name 3, ask them to name 2. You know, then do 4 things you can hear, 3 things you could smell, 2 things you could touch, 1 you could taste. And you're doing a sensory 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique with them while changing the field of vision. And that can be your most effective way of managing that. But I think we have to give our children a little bit of a break in that tantrums are a developmental task. Learning to master the tantrum is something they need our support and help with, and they will get through it. It's why it tends to be a phase of childhood rather than ongoing. If it's something that's ongoing, we're probably mislabeling it a tantrum, and it's something to do with hyperarousal and about just getting dysregulated very easily and quickly, and there could be lots of variables contributing to that. I hope I've answered that enough.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks, Joanna. I think that's really reassuring to hear as well as parents. So I've just noticed there's a good few questions that have come in here, and they're quite similar in terms of their theme. So A lot of them are related to fussy eating, so which I think will be for yourself, Sarah. I might just read one of them as an example, but I think your answer might address, like I said, a number of people's questions. So this particular one is, my son eats a great varied diet in creche, but since we don't get home until nearly 6 in the evening, I just give him porridge for his tea. Is that okay? He also won't really eat my own dinners that I mash up for him at the weekends. I rely on chilled dinners. I really want him to increase his homemade dinners, but it's so hard when he just refuses. Any advice would be much appreciated.
So the first thing is, yes, the porridge is fine in the evening. If he's eating kind of a good variety of foods and he's getting his protein in creche and he's getting his, his yogurt and his cheese and all of that's happening, absolutely no problem to give him porridge in the evening. A little bit of protein in the milk there, and what you can do, same as you might do at a breakfast time, toddlers, a little few crushed up seeds can be nice, not whole ones at that age, but it just gives a little fiber. You can slice a bit of banana into that, a little bit of fruit, so to kind of mix it up there, but that's absolutely fine. If they're eating everything else through the day, it's fine. So in terms of getting them to eat your dinners at the weekend, it's a little bit of, there's a million things. I always think this with the fussy eating, it looks like one simple question. Some of it is just offering them the normal food and not worrying if they go hungry. Because if he's actually eating really well the rest of the time, and then on the weekend, if he has his breakfast and it's fine, and he has his lunch and it's fine, and then he's kind of, I'm not doing dinner, again, I wouldn't be terribly worried about that. What you can do is give him if it's a frozen dinner, whatever it is that you're normally giving him, and put on a side plate a very small amount of the meal or a part of the meal you'd like him to have, and actually just keep doing that. He's not going to touch it for days, but if you actually just do that, often kids get curious about stuff. And often with new foods, it's a little bit to do with texture and familiarity. And sometimes if you sort of put a whole plate of it down, it's like unfamiliar, I don't know it, I don't like it, and you can just forget it. Whereas a little bit on the side isn't threatening. And kids kind of what you'll find with this is after about 5 goes, they'll often touch it. And then after about 8 to 10 goes, they might pick it up and squidge it a bit. And then, around 10 to 12 goes, they might rub it on their lips. And then after about 16 goes, they might actually eat it. Now, it doesn't work for all kids, but it might be peas, it might be carrot, it might be whatever it is. But if you actually do that, the child is getting to learn the look of it, the smell of it, the feel of it on their hands, the feel of it on their lips, and then eventually it comes in. So they're sort of growing a feeling of safety around the food rather than it being a threatening thing that you have put down and you're going to make them eat. The crucial thing with all of this, though, is you make no comment, which is the hard part for parents. Is you put the plate down and you have the pea, like one pea on the plate, and the child is going to go, I'm not going to eat that. And you go, that's fine. And they go, I'm definitely not going to eat it. And you go, that's absolutely fine. And they go, I hate it. And you go, that's absolutely fine. Don't engage. Don't hand it to them and go, there's a lovely pea, now eat that pea, it'll be a really nice pea, I'll give you ice cream if you eat that. Just put the pea down and forget about it. And even if they touch it, say nothing. Even if they eventually eat it, you still say nothing. You just take the whole drama out of the whole thing. And it's not an overnight technique, but it's actually, it takes that row out of it and it lets the child develop with it. But as I said, the odd time, just give them the meal, and if they don't eat it, don't worry about it. Don't replace it. Don't give them a yogurt instead. Don't give them something else instead, because you're just teaching them then if they refuse it, they get a favorite food. And that's where you end up with your chicken nuggets and chip child. It's not that they didn't eat, it's that they learned every time they said no to the healthy meal, they got their favorite meal. So it's okay now and again for them to not eat dinner.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, because there's quite a few questions that were similar to that around fussy eating. So we still have some time for more questions. Another good one here I can see, which I might answer, is how many meals and snacks a day for a toddler, and how much time between meals and snacks? So I think, Sarah, you did address this briefly as well, but I guess a toddler's stomach is about the same size as their closed fist. So that really shows us that each spoonful of food that they have is obviously really important. So in order to achieve your toddler's high nutrient needs, you should be aiming to give them about 3 balanced meals per day, and this will be in the form of breakfast, lunch and dinner. And then additionally, 2 healthy snacks per day are appropriate. I suppose in terms of the timing of these snacks, this will obviously depend on the toddler's routine, but generally a mid-morning and an afternoon snack would be appropriate. And then I guess overall, providing a balanced diet for your toddler, it would involve combining foods from different food groups, serving them in the correct proportions and making sure that they're spread out throughout the day, so that they do have enough of an appetite to eat them. So another question here has come in for Joanna. So Joanna, my son is finding it very hard to share with his cousins. Have you any tips to improve this?
Oh, that's so interesting. I was just doing a podcast, recording a podcast for the coming weeks on exactly this issue. I think it must be in the air. Maybe it's the time of year or something we're coming up to, and gift giving and gift receiving being the focus. It's mine, and all of this. Or maybe us parents are trying to think we should really clear out some toys to make room before a deluge arrives. But sharing is a big question at the moment, I'm finding. I would say there's two ways of approaching this, okay? And a little bit like what Sarah's been saying about avoiding the drama, avoid the battle, because as soon as it's a battle, it's about power and control. I think we have to think about it from the child's perspective. If I have my toy, whatever it might be, I have my toy here and it's mine, okay? And my sibling comes over and goes, but I want it. And I'm like, oh, but it's mine. But it's mine. And then you come in and go, oh, just don't let them lose, just give it to them. That's very hard. And I don't learn about sharing in that action. What I learn is that my younger sibling is super annoying, and their super annoying behavior means I lose my toy and they get it. And actually it breeds resentment. It makes me less likely to share. If you come in and you say, oh, I know you see your brother really wants a go of your toy, and I know when you're finished with it, you'll give him a go. Then you put the power back in my hands and I'm like, yeah. And then I can finish it and give him a go, but it's happening on my terms and I get to please you by doing that. That's more about teaching me to share. I think as well, as always with young children, they take their positive behavior and emotional cues from us adults. So we have to look at, how we talk about sharing and how we model sharing with them. And that might be that we share food with them, or we share a snack with them, or we share a book we're reading, or we compromise and what do you want to watch? What do I want to watch? Let's make something that we both want to watch, or read a book, or whatever it might be, that you actually, even within the play you're doing with them, when you're taking them and doing, the little small world play that they do in that kind of 3-year-old up to 5-year-old level, they're doing very much about this kind of small world, serve and return, one voice and the other voice. You can introduce concepts like sharing within the play, because then it's not about me, but I'm seeing it happening and I'm integrating that as a default behavior. So when I'm then in a scenario that triggers, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do here because I've played it out. And that's really where, I was saying about play being a language. That's really what it is. It helps me to make meaning. So I think that's the way I would tend to approach it. It's as a professional, but also as a parent, is I know it's your toy and I know that you're really kind. And when you're finished playing with it, you will give the other child a go of your toy because you make good choices. And then I walk away. That the only way I'm getting pulled in is if it's a battle, if it's actually a battle and not one that I'm making. Because I think it's hard. Just think about if you get yourself a fancy new iPhone and you're on it and some stranger comes up going, oh, I like the look of that. Can I have a go? Are you likely to hand them your new iPhone and say, sure, because sharing is caring, off you go with my item? You're not really. So it's something that we actually impose on children with an expectation that they can manage all of the emotional upheaval that can bring. Now, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying, each for their own, it's mine, good luck, I'm not giving it to you. I think we do need to model that, but I think we have to manage expectations, and particularly around age, cause and effect thinking, even though we think we're raising little evil geniuses who know exactly what they're up to. Consistent cause and effect thinking really doesn't click in until over 4 years old. And again, I'm talking about developmental age, not chronological, because there can be other reasons a chronological 4-year-old might emotionally be 2 or 3, but around that age of developmentally being 4, I get, if I give him the toy, then I'm earning myself some good karma over here, and I'm more likely to get the treat that I'm looking for, the privilege that I'm looking for. When I'm young, it's quite simple. It's mine. And that is the end of the story. And if you get to play with it, it'll be on my terms. So I think you model the sharing. I think you encourage it by saying, I know when you're ready, you'll give your sibling a go, or the friend a go, or whoever it might be. And if you're out in public and someone just wants your child's scooter or toy and they don't want to share it, really that's okay for your child to say no. You know, I think it's about, we get mortified, don't we, that, but it's so rude and I don't want the other parent looking at me and going, your child doesn't share. And actually we're thinking about, is this a reasonable request? And then you put it to your child that you know they'll make the right choice. And then we have to trust as parents that we've done enough modeling that they truly will make the right choice. And if they don't, and when they don't, maybe later on we can go, oh, you know, I wonder how that went. This little boy really wanted to go with your toy and you decided not to give him a go. And then he went away and played with somebody else. So I wonder, would you go and do that differently the next time? Or I wonder what we could change about that. You can do a reflective piece on it, but I think give it time. The sharing will come through modeling, but give it time. Don't force it.
Great, thanks, Joanna. So I think we'll answer 2 final questions. So Sarah, this one is for yourself. How can I get my toddler to eat more fruit? He's only eating vegetables and won't eat fruit. I give him smoothies, but is that enough?
So smoothies are definitely enough if they'll take them. Just be careful with smoothies. A nice thing is if you're putting all the fruit in, which is brilliant, try not to use a whole lot of fruit juice there as well. A little bit is okay. But milk is a nice thing to put into the smoothies, yogurt, something like that. So if they will take them, brilliant. If they're eating a lot of vegetables, I wouldn't be losing a whole lot of sleep about the fruit, to be honest. So if you have them taking a smoothie and then they're eating sort of vegetables the rest of the day, you know, what you want, especially for toddlers, is sort of, you know, a couple of small servings. They don't need to be on this 5 a day that all of the rest of us are looking at. So it's just to kind of bring it in. With the fruit, what you can do is, if they won't eat it sort of fresh, try cooking it a little bit, because sometimes they will eat things like stewed apple. They might eat, you know, sliced up banana. They might eat, you know, and I know it sounds like an odd thing, but if you do little muffins with blueberries in them or raspberries in them, often they'll eat them for that. And you're just getting that texture of blueberry and that texture of raspberry, which is just getting them used to it, but in a sort of a cake, so they like that. So even things like apple tart and stuff, just in small amounts, it gets the fruit in and it gets the flavor in, even as it's a dessert rather than you giving them fruit. The other thing I'd get them to do is help them to make something like a fruit salad. That you might do it for dinner, but get them to sort of, particularly if they're kind of 2, 3, get them to throw their hands in, get them to mix all the fruit around with their hands, get them to put the fruit juice in on top of it. Because even if they don't eat it, they've covered their hands in it, they've got up to their nose in the smell of it, and they have definitely licked their fingers 15 times. So that's got all the taste in as well. And don't make them eat it at the end of it. But sometimes if they've made it, they might eat it because they've made it. But the trick is actually the making of it and the feel of it and the smell of it and the fact that they do lick their fingers. So making anything with fruit with them can really help to break that barrier down as well. So you always want to think with sort of food is familiarity and exposure. So the other thing you can do as well is, if you're in the supermarket, can you say to them, well, will you put the oranges in the bag for me? So they have to pick up the orange and put it in the bag. Or can you put the apples in? Or, you know, can you get me, you know, if you were doing vegetables, go and get the broccoli. So again, they're touching it, they're handling it, but in doing that in the supermarket is a really non-threatening place for them, because there's no expectation that they have to eat it there. And so that can really help. And the other one is, and I know COVID is a disaster for this at the moment, but if you can get other kids to the house, or you can go somewhere else where they see other children their age eating fruit, they're kind of modeling that to them. And, you know, not so much peer pressure, but kids will copy other kids. So that can work really, really well. But also make sure you eat fruit. But also, if, you know, there's another parent or guardian in the house, they've got to be eating fruit as well. So what you'll sometimes have is you might have 2 parents and one eats fruit and the other doesn't, and the child is copying the one who doesn't. So they often need to, God love them, if they hate fruit, start eating fruit. And my poor husband was warned when we were having kids, going, you need to get up on the vegetable thing. So he eats lettuce under sufferance. He does it, but it's that modeling behavior. So there's lots of things with that. So I hope some of those might help for you.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. So one final question here, which I will answer is, do I need to give my toddler a vitamin D supplement? So that's a really good question, and the answer is yes. So Irish toddler guidelines do recommend that toddlers are given a daily vitamin D supplement from Halloween to St. Patrick's Day, which is obviously the stage where we're at now. So vitamin D is extremely important for a number of reasons, and it actually can be quite difficult to get the right amount from food sources alone. So let alone if your toddler is a fussy eater, like we've been discussing. So some common sources of vitamin D would be sunlight, oily fish, egg yolks, fortified foods, and also fortified milks can contribute to your toddler's vitamin D intakes as well. So in the interest of time, I think that will be the end of our Q&A session. We did get quite a high volume of questions, and so we will try and get back to as many of these directly as we can after the webinar. I just want to thank everyone for joining the webinar this evening, and a special thank you to our two speakers for the evening. I personally found it extremely interesting and useful, and I hope you all did also. Can I kindly ask you all to complete our post-event survey after the webinar has closed? And then finally, we really appreciate you taking the time to tune in this evening during we know what can be your downtime, and so we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.